The dance studio smelled of rosin and sweat, the scent so familiar to Olivia Chen that she barely registered it anymore. Late afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor that bore the scuff marks of 1,000-point shoes. Olivia watched her advanced class move through their combinations, her trained eye catching every imperfect arabesque, every wobbling releve, every moment where technique faltered under the weight of fatigue or distraction. She'd been teaching for 7 years now, ever since the knee injury that had ended her own performing career at 24, and she'd learned to find satisfaction in shaping other dancers, even if she could no longer be one herself. The beginner class would arrive in 15 minutes, and Olivia used the transition time to reset the studio, closing the piano lid, adjusting the bars, making sure the sound system was cued to the right playlist. She was pushing 31 now, living in a studio apartment above a bodega, teaching 6 classes a day just to make rent on this space and keep herself fed. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd been accepted into the New York City Ballet's Corps at 19, but it was honest work, and there was something pure about teaching children who still believed that grace and beauty mattered in a world that increasingly seemed to value neither. The first of her beginners started arriving, 6- and 7-year-olds in pink leotards and tights, their hair pulled back in buns of varying neatness, their faces bright with the kind of excitement that came before reality set in about how much work ballet actually required. Olivia greeted each parent, made notes about who needed to be picked up when, answered questions about the upcoming recital with the patience she'd cultivated over years of repetitive conversations. Then Isabella Romano arrived. The girl was 8, small for her age, with dark curls escaping from her bun, and enormous brown eyes that held a sadness no child should carry. She wore an expensive leotard. Olivia recognized the brand, knew it cost more than she spent on groceries in a month, and pristine pink ballet shoes that had clearly never been worn. Behind her came a woman in a designer suit who had nanny written all over her efficient posture and professional distance. "This is Isabella," the nanny said, her accent suggesting Eastern European origins. "Mr. Romano has enrolled her for the beginner class. He'll be picking her up personally at 6. Olivia took in Isabella's hunched shoulders, the way she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, the grip she had on the nanny's hand that spoke of desperation rather than affection. "Hi, Isabella," Olivia said gently, crouching to the girl's level. "Have you done ballet before?" Isabella shook her head mutely. "That's okay. Everyone starts somewhere. Why don't you go warm up at the bar with the other girls? We'll begin in just a few minutes." Isabella released the nanny's hand with obvious reluctance and drifted toward the bar, her movements already revealing what Olivia's trained eye could see even in simple walking: poor turnout, weak ankles, a general lack of the natural grace that marked children who had an aptitude for dance. It wasn't Isabella's fault, wasn't a judgment on her worth as a person. Some children were born with bodies that understood music and movement intuitively, and some weren't. Olivia had learned long ago not to confuse the two, not to let technical ability determine her affection for her students. The class began with basic exercises at the bar, pliés and tendus, and simple combinations that would build the foundation these young dancers needed. Olivia moved through the studio with practiced efficiency, correcting posture here, adjusting an arm position there, offering encouragement to children who were struggling and praise to those who were succeeding. She watched Isabella carefully, noting how the girl tried so hard to follow instructions, but couldn't quite make her body cooperate, how frustration built in her small face with each failed attempt to match the other students' movements. By the end of the hour-long class, Isabella was near tears, her face flushed with effort and embarrassment. The other girls were chattering excitedly as they gathered their things, but Isabella stood alone by the bar, staring at her feet like they'd betrayed her. Olivia approached carefully, keeping her voice gentle. "Isabella, your dad will be here soon to pick you up. Do you want to get your things?" "I'm bad at this," Isabella whispered, so quietly Olivia almost didn't hear. I'm bad at everything. The words hit Olivia square in the chest, because she'd heard them before from other children, because she knew the particular pain of being 8 years old and feeling like failure was your defining characteristic. You're not bad at everything, Olivia said firmly. You're new at ballet. That's different. Everyone is clumsy when they're learning something for the first time. The other girls are better than me. The other girls have been taking class for 6 months or a year already. You're comparing your beginning to their middle. That's not fair to yourself. Olivia sat down on the floor, gesturing for Isabella to join her, waiting until the girl reluctantly complied. Can I tell you a secret? Isabella nodded, her eyes finally meeting Olivia's. I wasn't very good when I started ballet either. I was 9, older than you, and I spent the first 6 months falling over my own feet and forgetting which arm went where. But I loved it anyway, and I kept trying, and eventually my body learned what my brain was trying to tell it to do. Olivia paused, choosing her next words carefully. But here's the thing, Isabella. Not everyone who loves ballet is meant to be a ballerina. Some people love it for the art, for the music, for how it makes them feel even if they never become professionals. And that's okay. Dancing doesn't have to be about being the best. It can just be about finding joy in movement. My papa wants me to be the best, Isabella said, and there was such weight in those words, such pressure visible in her small shoulders. He says Romano women are exceptional at everything they do. Olivia felt her stomach sink, because she knew this story too, had seen it play out with too many students whose parents pushed them toward achievements they weren't suited for. Does your papa know that you don't love ballet? Isabella's eyes widened with something that looked like fear. I can't tell him that. He'll be disappointed. Before Olivia could respond, the studio door opened and a man entered who changed the very air in the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that was almost aggressive in its expensive perfection, his dark hair graying at the temples, his face marked with the kind of harsh lines that came from years of making difficult decisions. 2 other men flanked him. Security, obviously, their eyes constantly scanning, despite the innocuous setting of a children's dance studio. The man's presence was so commanding that the few remaining parents gathered their children and left quickly, instinctively recognizing someone it was better not to linger around. Papa! Isabella jumped up, her face transforming from misery to desperate hope, and Olivia saw the little girl practically vibrate with the need for her father's approval. The man's expression softened fractionally as he looked at his daughter, something almost tender breaking through the granite of his features. Bella, how was your first class? Isabella's hesitation was painful to witness. Olivia could see the girl trying to decide between honesty and the answer she thought her father wanted, could see the war between her own feelings and her desperate need to please him. She worked very hard, Olivia interjected, standing and brushing off her practice clothes. She was suddenly aware of how she must look. Worn leggings, tank top damp with sweat from demonstrating movements, her dark hair falling out of its ponytail. Next to this man's polished perfection, she felt disheveled and insignificant. Isabella, why don't you go get your regular clothes from the changing room? I'd like to speak with your father for a moment. Isabella looked between them uncertainly, then fled toward the small changing area at the back of the studio. The man watched her go before turning his full attention to Olivia, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, assessing and calculating and seeing far too much. I'm Olivia Chen, she said, extending her hand with a confidence she didn't quite feel. I own this studio and teach most of the classes. Dante Romano. His handshake was firm but brief, professional despite the underlying current of something that felt like danger barely contained. How is my daughter progressing? This was the moment Olivia had been dreading, the conversation she'd had with too many parents who didn't want to hear that their child wasn't a prodigy. She thought about the easy lie, telling Dante Romano that Isabella just needed more time, more practice, that she'd improve with dedication. But she looked at this man who radiated power and control, and she thought about Isabella's tears, about the pressure crushing that small girl's spirit, and she made a decision that she knew might cost her. "Mr. Romano, can I be honest with you?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect for the directness. "I prefer honesty." Isabella doesn't have natural aptitude for ballet. Her body doesn't have the turnout or flexibility that makes dance easier to learn, and more importantly, she doesn't seem to love it. She's trying very hard because she wants to please you, but I don't think ballet is where she's going to find joy or success. Olivia kept her voice gentle but firm, holding his gaze even as she saw his expression darken. "I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but I think Isabella needs permission to try other activities, to find something that actually speaks to her instead of something she's doing because she thinks it's expected." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Olivia watched Dante Romano's jaw clench, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, watched something cold and furious move behind his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was controlled to the point of mechanical precision. "Let me understand this correctly. After one class, one single hour with my daughter, you've determined that she has no talent and no future in dance?" "That's not what I said." "You said she lacks aptitude. You said she doesn't love it. Based on what, exactly? Your expert assessment of an 8-year-old child who was nervous in a new environment?" Dante's voice never rose, but somehow that made it more threatening, like violence held on a very short leash. Isabella's mother was a dancer before she died. Ballet was everything to her. I enrolled Isabella in this class so she could connect with that part of her mother, so she could understand the art form that meant so much to our family. And you're telling me, after 60 minutes, that she should quit. Olivia felt the words like a punch to the chest. Isabella's mother was dead. This wasn't about pressure or unrealistic expectations. It was about grief, about a father trying desperately to give his daughter a connection to the parent she'd lost. Olivia's certainty wavered for just a moment before she forced herself to hold firm, because grief didn't change reality, and Isabella's tears had been real. "I'm not telling her to quit," Olivia said quietly. "I'm suggesting that maybe there are other ways to honor her mother's memory that might be better suited to who Isabella actually is. Art, music, theater. There are so many forms of creative expression. Maybe one of those would." "I didn't come here for your advice on parenting, Miss Chen. I came here to enroll my daughter in ballet classes, which I'm paying for quite generously." Dante's voice could have cut glass. "Isabella will continue attending. You will teach her. And you will do so without filling her head with ideas about quitting or trying something else. Is that clear?" Olivia should have backed down, should have apologized, should have said whatever would smooth over this confrontation with a man who was clearly dangerous in ways she didn't fully understand. But she thought about Isabella standing by the bar, saying, "I'm bad at everything," and something in her refused to yield. "I'll teach her," Olivia said steadily, "but I won't lie to her about her progress, and I won't push her into something that's making her miserable just because it's what you want. If you want me to be her teacher, you have to trust me to do what's best for her development, not what makes you feel like you're preserving your wife's memory." The look Dante gave her was absolutely lethal, and Olivia realized with a jolt of fear that she'd crossed a line, that she'd spoken to him in a way that probably no one else dared. His security detail had tensed, their hands moving almost imperceptibly toward weapons she suddenly had no doubt they carried. The studio felt very small and very isolated, and Olivia understood with crystalline clarity that she'd put herself in danger. Then Isabella emerged from the changing room, her small face still blotchy from the tears she'd tried to hide, and Dante's expression transformed again into that careful gentleness reserved only for his daughter. "Ready to go, Bella?" Isabella nodded, glancing at Olivia with something that might have been apology or gratitude or both. "Same time next week?" she asked, her voice small. "Same time," Olivia confirmed, though she was looking at Dante, making sure he understood that she meant it. that she wouldn't be scared off despite the danger she'd just courted. Dante held her gaze for a long moment, something complex passing between them that Olivia couldn't quite name. Then he placed his hand on Isabella's shoulder and guided her toward the door, his security detail falling in behind them. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "We'll discuss your teaching methods next week, Miss Chen. Extensively." It sounded like a threat. It probably was a threat. But as Olivia watched them leave, watched Isabella's small hand slip into her father's larger one, she knew she'd made the right choice, even if it cost her. The week that followed was tense with anticipation that Olivia tried to ignore. She taught her classes, worked on choreography for the upcoming recital, paid bills that always seemed to exceed her income, and tried not to think about Dante Romano's cold fury or the way his security detail had looked at her like she was a problem that might need solving. She told herself that he'd probably find a different ballet studio for Isabella, somewhere with teachers who would tell him what he wanted to hear instead of uncomfortable truths. But when Tuesday afternoon arrived, Isabella walked through the studio door exactly on time, her nanny hovering behind her with the same efficient distance as before. This time, though, Isabella met Olivia's eyes immediately, and there was something different in her expression, a tentative hope that hadn't been there the previous week. "Hi, Isabella," Olivia said, forcing normalcy into her voice. "Ready to work?" Isabella nodded, and as she moved to join the other girls at the bar, she whispered, "Papa said I should tell you if I don't like something. He said you're the teacher, and you know about dancing, and I should trust you." The words hit Olivia with surprising force, because they suggested that Dante Romano had actually heard her, had actually thought about what she'd said despite his anger. She didn't know what to do with that information, didn't know how to reconcile the furious man who'd essentially threatened her with someone who would tell his daughter to trust her judgment. The class went better than the first one, partly because Isabella knew what to expect now, and partly because Olivia made a conscious effort to modify exercises to Isabella's ability level rather than forcing her to match the other students. She worked with Isabella on simple balance exercises, on finding pleasure in movement, even when it wasn't perfect, on understanding that dance was a journey rather than a destination. And slowly, tentatively, Isabella began to smile during class, not because she was suddenly good at ballet, but because she was starting to feel less like a failure. When 6 o'clock arrived, Olivia found herself watching the door with intention she didn't want to examine. Dante Romano entered exactly on time, the same commanding presence filling the studio, but this time he came alone, without his security detail. He stood by the door, watching the last few minutes of class, and Olivia felt his gaze on her like a weight, assessing every correction she made, every word of encouragement she offered his daughter. After the other students left, Isabella ran to her father with the kind of uncomplicated joy that suggested the week between classes had been good for both of them. "Did you see, Papa? I didn't fall today during the balance exercise." "I saw," Dante said, and there was genuine pride in his voice, the kind that had nothing to do with technical perfection and everything to do with seeing his child happy. "You worked very hard," Isabella beamed, then looked between her father and Olivia with sudden awareness. "Are you going to talk about teaching methods? Should I wait outside?" "That's probably a good idea, Piccola," Dante said gently. "Go sit with Maria. I'll only be a few minutes." After Isabella left, Olivia steeled herself for the confrontation she'd been anticipating all week, but Dante didn't immediately speak. He moved into the studio, his expensive shoes loud against the hardwood floor, his eyes taking in the worn barres, and the ancient piano, and the posters of famous ballets that covered water-stained walls. "This place is falling apart," he observed, not unkindly. "I'm aware," Olivia said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "The rent takes most of what I make. There's not a lot left over for renovations. Yet you turn away students whose parents might actually be able to afford your full rate." Olivia understood what he was referencing, the sliding scale she offered for families who couldn't afford the published prices, the scholarship students who trained for free because they had talent and passion, but no money. Ballet shouldn't only be for rich kids, she said simply. Dante looked at her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. You were right, he said finally. About Isabella. About the pressure I was putting on her. The admission knocked Olivia off balance more effectively than any threat could have. Mr. Romano. Dante, he interrupted. If you're going to tell me uncomfortable truths about my parenting, we should at least be on first-name basis. Dante, Olivia corrected, the name feeling strange on her tongue. I wasn't trying to criticize your parenting. I was just trying to advocate for Isabella. I know. He was quiet for a moment, and Olivia saw genuine struggle in his expression, like he was wrestling with something difficult. My wife, Elena, died 3 years ago. Cancer. She fought it for 18 months, and Isabella watched her mother waste away bit by bit. After Elena died, I threw myself into work because I didn't know how to process the grief, and I left Isabella with nannies because I couldn't face her sadness on top of my own. I've been a shit father, essentially, absent when she needed me present. The raw honesty was unexpected, and Olivia found herself softening toward this complicated man who terrified her a week ago. You're here now. That's what matters. I'm here now because my 8-year-old daughter came home last week in tears. Not because class was hard. She didn't even mention that. She cried because she was terrified that I'd be angry with you, that you'd get in trouble for telling me the truth. She begged me not to hurt you. Dante's voice was rough with emotion he was barely containing. My daughter was more concerned about protecting her ballet teacher than about her own feelings. That told me everything I needed to know about how badly I've failed her. Olivia felt tears prick at her own eyes, unexpected and inconvenient. Isabella is a good kid, kind and thoughtful, and way too worried about everyone else's feelings. She just needs to know it's okay to think about her own happiness too. That's what I'm trying to figure out how to teach her. Dante moved closer, and Olivia was suddenly aware of how tall he was, how much space he took up, how his presence seemed to charge the air around him. I want to hire you, not just for the group class, but for private sessions with Isabella. Help her figure out if ballet is really something she wants to pursue, or if there's something else that might be better suited to her. That's not really how I work, Olivia started. I teach classes here, but I don't usually do private. I'll pay whatever you ask. Name your price. Dante's intensity was focused entirely on her now, and Olivia felt pinned by it, felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and thrilling. I want the best for my daughter, and you clearly care about her well-being more than about telling me what I want to hear. That makes you valuable, Olivia Chen. Olivia thought about her failing studio, about the bills that kept piling up, about the reality that she was one bad month away from closing her doors permanently. She thought about how Dante Romano's money could solve so many of her immediate problems, could give her breathing room to actually build something sustainable. But she also thought about the danger she'd sensed in him that first day, about the security detail with weapons, about the way people had left the studio quickly when he arrived. What exactly do you do, Dante? She asked, echoing the question she'd wanted to ask from the beginning. For work, I mean. Something shifted in his expression. Calculation, maybe, or assessment of how much truth she could handle. I manage my family's business interests, import and export primarily, though we have investments in various sectors. That's not an answer. A smile ghosted across Dante's lips. There and gone so quickly, Olivia almost missed it. You're perceptive. My family has been in Boston for 4 generations, building an empire that operates in gray areas. We're not criminals in the way law enforcement typically defines the term, but we're also not entirely legitimate in the way most businesses are. I keep my family's interests protected and profitable, and sometimes that means operating outside conventional boundaries. Olivia should have been scared, should have refused his offer, should have told him to find someone else to work with Isabella. But there was something in his honesty that disarmed her, something in the way he looked at her that suggested he was offering her a choice rather than making a demand. "I'll work with Isabella," Olivia heard herself say. "2 private sessions per week, in addition to the group class. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll actually listen when I give you feedback about her progress. That you won't push her toward ballet if it becomes clear she's better suited to something else. That you'll let her quit if she asks to, without making her feel like she's disappointing you." Olivia held his gaze steadily. "I'm not doing this for money if it means participating in crushing a little girl's spirit." "Agreed," Dante said without hesitation. "And I have a condition of my own." "Which is?" "That you'll tell me the truth about other things too. Not just about Isabella's ballet progress, but about this studio, about what you need to keep it running, about whether you're actually okay or just pretending to be." Dante's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I pay my debts, Olivia, and I owe you one for making me see what I was doing to my daughter. Let me help." Olivia wanted to refuse, wanted to insist she could handle everything on her own, but she was tired of struggling alone, tired of pretending she had everything under control when she was barely keeping her head above water. And there was something in Dante Romano's intensity that made her think he saw through her defenses anyway, that pretending would be futile. "The studio needs a new heating system," she admitted quietly, "and the floor should be refinished before someone gets hurt. And I'm 3 months behind on rent to the building owner, who's been patient but won't be forever." Dante pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at her. "Done. The heating system will be installed by Friday. The floor crew will come on Sunday when you're closed. And your rent is current as of right now, with 3 months paid in advance." "Dante, that's too much. I can't accept." "You can and you will. Consider it payment for the private lessons, plus compensation for having to deal with me when I was being an ass." His expression was firm, brooking no argument. "You help my daughter, I help your studio. That's fair exchange." It wasn't fair exchange, not really. What he was offering was worth far more than a few private ballet lessons. But Olivia could see in his face that arguing would be futile, that Dante Romano was a man used to getting his way, and unlikely to be deterred once he'd made a decision. "Thank you," she said finally, because there was nothing else to say, because refusing would be stupid pride that she couldn't afford. "You're welcome." Dante moved toward the door, then paused. "First private session tomorrow at 4, before the group class?" "I'll be here." "Good." He looked back at her one more time, and something in his expression made Olivia's breath catch. "I'm glad Isabella stumbled into your studio, Olivia Chen. I think you might be exactly what both of us needed." Then he was gone, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of her worn-down studio that was suddenly going to get repaired, trying to understand what had just happened. She pulled out her phone and checked her bank account, half expecting that conversation to have been some kind of fever dream. But there it was, a deposit that made her gasp out loud, more money than she usually made in 3 months, with a note that read simply, "Studio repairs and rent." Olivia sat down on the studio floor, her legs suddenly unsteady. She'd told a powerful man an uncomfortable truth about his parenting, and instead of facing consequences, she'd somehow ended up with a benefactor who seemed intent on fixing all her problems, whether she wanted him to or not. It was overwhelming and confusing and slightly terrifying, but it was also the first time in years that Olivia felt like she could breathe, like the constant weight of financial stress might actually lift enough for her to focus on what she loved, teaching children to find joy in movement, creating dancers who understood that technique served artistry rather than the other way around. She thought about Dante Romano's intensity, about the way he'd admitted his failures as a father with brutal honesty, about the care with which he'd spoken about his dead wife and struggling daughter. He was dangerous, yes, complicated, and operating in worlds she didn't understand. But he was also trying, in his own overwhelming way, to be better for the child who needed him. Olivia could work with that, She could teach Isabella, could help Dante learn how to connect with his daughter, could maybe in the process build something stable for herself. It was risky, getting involved with someone like Dante Romano, but Olivia had spent years playing it safe, and safety had gotten her a failing studio and a life of constant struggle. Maybe it was time to take a chance on something dangerous. The private lessons with Isabella began the next day and quickly established their own rhythm. Dante would arrive at 4 with Isabella, would stay for the first few minutes to watch, then would retreat to the small waiting area Olivia had set up with old chairs and a table scattered with dance magazines. Sometimes he worked on his phone, sometimes he just watched through the studio windows, but he was always present, always paying attention in a way that suggested he'd meant it when he said he wanted to be a better father. Isabella flourished under the individual attention. Without the pressure of keeping up with other students, she could explore movement at her own pace, could ask questions without fear of looking stupid, could laugh when she stumbled instead of fighting tears. Olivia experimented with different styles, showing Isabella jazz movements and contemporary dance, playing with rhythm and expression rather than focusing solely on classical ballet technique. It became clear within a few sessions that Isabella had more aptitude for contemporary work than classical ballet. Her body wanted to move with emotion rather than precision, wanted to tell stories through gesture rather than execute perfect positions. She lit up when Olivia showed her how to interpret music through improvisation, how to use her whole body to express feelings instead of just trying to remember combinations. "I think we should shift focus," Olivia told Dante after the 4th private lesson, while Isabella was in the changing room. "She's got real potential for contemporary dance and maybe theater dance, but classical ballet isn't where her strengths lie." Dante looked at her steadily. "You're saying she should quit ballet?" "I'm saying she should explore other forms of dance that might speak to her more clearly. She can still take the group ballet class if you want her to have that foundation, but the private lessons could focus on contemporary technique instead." Olivia hesitated, then added, "I think Elena would want Isabella to find joy in dance, whatever form that takes, not just to replicate what her mother did." Something flickered across Dante's face. Pain, perhaps? Or recognition of truth he'd been avoiding. "How did you know that's what I was trying to do? Make Isabella into a version of her mother?" "Because I understand living in someone else's shadow." Olivia's voice was quiet. "I spent years trying to be the dancer my teachers thought I should be instead of the dancer I actually was. By the time I figured out who I was authentically, my knee was destroyed and my career was over. I don't want that for Isabella. I want her to know who she is from the beginning." Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Olivia could see him processing, could see the internal struggle of a man trying to let go of expectations and embrace reality. "Teach her contemporary dance," he said finally. "Teach her whatever you think will help her understand herself and her art. I trust your judgment, Olivia." The trust in those words felt heavy, felt like responsibility and gift in equal measure. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to be honest." Dante's gaze was intense on hers. "That's rare. People in my world tend to tell me what they think I want to hear, not what I actually need to know. You're different." "I don't know your world well enough to know what you want to hear," Olivia said with a slight smile. "I only know dance and children. Those are my areas of expertise." "Maybe that's why I find myself looking forward to these sessions more than I probably should." Dante's voice dropped lower, more intimate, and Olivia felt heat creep up her neck. "Watching you teach, seeing how you connect with Isabella, it's like watching someone speak a language I never learned. You make something complicated look effortless." "It's not effortless," Olivia protested. "Teaching is hard. It's exhausting and frustrating and requires infinite patience." "But you love it. That's obvious." Dante moved slightly closer, and Olivia was suddenly aware of how alone they were in the studio, how the late afternoon light cast shadows that made the space feel intimate despite its size. When was the last time someone took care of you the way you take care of everyone else? The question caught Olivia off guard, hitting something vulnerable she usually kept protected. I don't need taking care of. I'm fine. You're exhausted. You work 12-hour days teaching children while your own dreams collect dust. You live in an apartment the size of a closet because all your money goes into this studio. You're surviving, Olivia, but are you actually living? Olivia felt exposed, felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and strangely welcome. That's none of your business. Maybe not, but I'd like it to be. Dante's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the violence she knew he was capable of. I'd like to take you to dinner. Not to discuss Isabella, not to talk about the studio, just to spend time with you, to understand who you are beyond the teacher who changed my daughter's life. Olivia should have said no, should have maintained professional boundaries, should have reminded him that she was his daughter's teacher and nothing more. But she found herself leaning into his touch instead, found herself wanting the connection he was offering, despite all the logical reasons to refuse it. One dinner, she heard herself say, but nothing that requires fancy clothes I don't own. Dante's smile was warm and genuine, transforming his harsh features into something almost beautiful. One dinner, tomorrow night. I'll pick you up at 7. Before Olivia could respond, Isabella emerged from the changing room, and the moment shattered. But as Dante left with his daughter, as Olivia locked up the studio and headed home to her tiny apartment, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Anticipation, hope, the possibility that life might offer more than just surviving if she was brave enough to reach for it. She thought about Dante's intensity, about the way he'd listened when she'd told him uncomfortable truths, about how he'd fixed her studio's problems without making her feel like charity. She thought about the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to Isabella, about the barely controlled violence that lurked beneath his polished exterior, about how those contradictions somehow made him more human rather than less. And she thought about tomorrow night, about dinner with a man who saw her clearly enough to know she was drowning and cared enough to offer a lifeline. It was risky, it was complicated, it was probably stupid. But Olivia had spent years playing it safe, and she was tired of safe. She was ready for something more,